been having a lot of conversations with folks about Shipbob's planned IPO. And really the headline there is that they're looking for a $4 billion valuation. And like, nobody would be more happy than maybe the founders or the equity owners of Shipbob if they went public at 4 billion than I would. But I'm just struggling to see that valuation making sense. And there's just a lot of different aspects of it. I mean, 3PLs are a notoriously difficult kind of lower margin business to be working with. I think there is a path for them to, get to the 4 billion if they do some different things. But I just think it's going to be a difficult thing to pull off at that valuation in 2024.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think too, like when it comes to 3PL fulfillment, though some people say it's a commodity, a lot of these fulfillment companies actually price in a very different manner, right? Like ShipBob, for example, I think just gives you one price that includes your warehousing and pick and pack fee, and sometimes even your shipping fee, kind of blends their margin into that. Whereas like a company like, ASAP Warehouse or Shipmonk or, whatever it may be, usually kind of breaks it down by line item in terms of, hey, this is your warehousing cost, this is your pick and pack fee, this is, what it's going to cost to ship your product from San Diego to New York or whatever it may be. So I think too, like from what I've seen in the e-commerce world, Shipbob is definitely a beast and one of the top players in the 3PL space. But sometimes I, from an operator standpoint, question like their pricing model. I'm not quite sure if they still do this like kind of one
They do.
price model. Okay, they do. Yeah, because I don't know. To me, I like to see line item by line item, hey, this is what everything's costing, right? And I'm just curious. I mean, what do you think their margin is? Have you seen any numbers around like what Shipbob's margins are?
I haven't. I would assume that they're probably around 10%. Would be a very healthy kind of 3PL EBITDA number. Obviously, you can go higher or lower, but I agree with you. I think for more sophisticated operators, you really want to be able to see all of the detail. You want to know what the dim charge was. You want to know what the different aspects of the fulfillment that were driving inefficiencies, so that you could go back and change things and improve it. To be fair to ShipUp, there's a lot to like there. I think that typically they are brands' first 3PL, partly because they're so good at SEO, but also because they do make it easy. And so I think that this all-in-one pricing is something that's helpful for very, very small brands, people who are just trying to get started, because that transparency could really mean the difference.
Yeah, I agree. But I think too, when it comes to that customer segment, I mean, working with small e-commerce brands is like the hardest segment to work with, right? Compared to if you look at like, a much bigger fulfillment center, a lot of times they want to work with some, more mature e-commerce brands because, everyone knows those small e-commerce brands, they do have high churn. Some of them make it and grow tremendously and grow with their 3PL. But at that scale too, when you're doing tens of millions in revenue, are you really going to want to have just, one line item, or are you going to want to have each 3PL cost kind of broken out item by item? So I think it's interesting. I mean, they're definitely growing. I mean, I'm pretty sure they're doing like, was it 300 million in revenue or at least 200, something around that?
I think it was closer to 500. They just struck
Okay.
a really good deal with TikTok Shop to be kind of their preferred fulfillment partner. I think what you talked about, though, of being really small brands and who they're working with, that only gets exacerbated by being the TikTok Shop kind of go-to person. They advertise they have about 7,000 brands that are part of Shipbob, and that's an amazing number. But I also talked to some folks that were close there a few weeks back, and they mentioned that they really only retain customers for a little over a year. And so that can be a very
Wow.
difficult kind of thing where you have a high amount of churn, you have these small guys that are coming through. And then really to grow their business and to grow their valuation, they're going to have to reposition themselves to not being a really small, not being a 3PL for really small brands, but to be really big brands. And I think they're going to have to be more complicated. As far as the $4 billion valuation goes, I think there's a path that they could do that, but it would basically be if they were to split up their company into three parts. I would split it up between the fulfillment operation, a real estate play, because they do own their own warehouses in the US, and then their technology. I would split off the technology and allow other investors or other companies to bid on that appropriately. But it's just difficult when you have all three of those things wrapped into one, because you're going to attract different investors that are almost going to discount the fact that these things are not pure play. as opposed to giving the benefit of it all being together.
That's a really good point. But I mean, I feel like with their partnership with TikTok Shops, they're kind of heading in the opposite direction of attracting big brands. And, for anyone that knows TikTok Shops, I mean, you're talking about huge spikes in short periods of time that go from shipping, 10,000 orders in a 2-day period to back down to a few orders a day, right?